They fined me $4, $200 before sunrise, and by noon a towboat was already booming into Pelican Harbor, its crane arm swinging over the canal like a guillotine. I stood on my dock and watched my red BMW rise, dripping from the slip salt water streaming off the bumper, while our HOA president, Veronica Hale, shouted over the engine about community standards. My name is Ethan Ward, civil engineer widower, and apparently their newest target. What they didn't know was that I'd been mapping every rule they bent, every dollar they redirected, and every signature they forgot to notarize. Engineers hate loose ends. And beneath this shiny dock under the planks and paint and petty power, I'd found the one thing they never imagined: I could own the ground itself. Tonight, I'm going to show you how a quiet homeowner turned their favorite weapon into their weakest point, and what happened when the truth hit daylight. Before we dive in, drop your location and local time in the comments so I know where you're watching from. When the towboat's echo finally faded, I stood there staring at the empty space on the dock where my car had been. The sea breeze carried the faint scent of diesel and salt, and for a strange second, I could almost hear Mia's voice, soft, amused, telling me to breathe before I broke something. She used to say this dock would be our sanctuary, a quiet piece of Florida that belonged to no one but us. Now it felt like a crime scene. Pelican Harbor's HOA wasn't supposed to be like this. When I bought the place 3 years ago, the brochures called it a tranquil coastal community, committed to integrity and preservation. Back then, the president was a retired pilot who cared more about keeping the sea turtles safe than about the color of your mailbox. Then Veronica Hale arrived, new board, new bylaws, and a new obsession with aesthetics. Under her, every home became a specimen, every owner a suspect. The first violation came on pastel letterhead paint tone irregularity, $125. Fine. I remember laughing at the absurdity. The second was less funny, unauthorized mailbox ornamentation. That one carried a threat. Failure to comply may result in further penalties. And now this. A $4 200 dock misuse fee for parking my 20-year-old fishing boat next to her friend's 40-foot yacht. At 5:47 a.m., they emailed the fine. By noon, the towboat was hauling my BMW into the air like a prize catch. I filmed the entire thing, time-stamped and geolocated. Neighbors peeked from porches, phones in hand, pretending not to see. One of them, an older man with sunburned arms and a mug that said U.S. Coast Guard, just shook his head slowly. His name was Ray Delgado. I didn't know it yet, but that man would become the single best ally I'd ever have. That evening, I found him sitting in a folding chair by the canal, feeding crumbs to a pelican. "They got you too?" he asked, not even looking up. "They took my car," I said. He chuckled without humor. "Next, they'll take your patience. Then your sanity. That's how they work." He told me he'd been fined 2 years earlier for a flagpole height violation. He'd fought it, won, and started keeping what he called his HOA war journal, a thick binder filled with dates, letters, and photographs. "They target singles, widowers, anyone without backup," he said. "They think you'll fold." I went home and opened a new spiral notebook. At the top of the first page, I wrote Pelican Harbor HOA incident log. Below that, I listed every infraction I'd ever received down to the minute. Paint tone, mailbox, dock use. Each with photos, receipts, and timestamps. The next morning, I drove to the county recorder's office. The clerk, a gray-haired woman with reading glasses dangling from her neck, printed out the official HOA covenants for $3.50 per page. 91 pages later, my fingers were covered in ink. There, near the end, was the clause Veronica had quoted on my fine notice: dock access regulations. Revised. Filed yes. But the signature line was blank. No notarization stamp, no witness initials. For a licensed engineer like me, seeing a structural flaw is like smelling smoke. That missing stamp was a crack in their foundation. Florida law was clear: any amendment affecting property use had to be properly executed and recorded. Without it, the rule was void, and every fine based on it unenforceable. When I showed Ray, his eyes lit up. "That's your lever," he said. "You just need a fulcrum." He poured coffee from his thermos and told me about how HOAs hide their paper trails. "They'll tell you something's policy," he said, "but policy ain't law. If you want proof, send certified letters. Make them sign every envelope." So that's what I did. I sent my first formal request for records, financials, amendments, vendor contracts under Florida Statute 720.303. 10 business days. They had to respond. Instead, on day 11, I received another citation: improper storage of tools in view, $150. The message was clear. They weren't going to cooperate. They were going to retaliate. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by documents with Mia's old lamp glowing beside me. Its light caught the sheen of the tow notice. The words blurred into the reflection of my own face, tired, angry, but focused. I whispered, "All right, Veronica. You started this game. Let's see if you can finish it." I began researching. Most homeowners don't know this, but every HOA must file annual financial disclosures with the state. Those disclosures are public record. I combed through the archives and found that Pelican Harbor hadn't filed theirs in over 2 years. That wasn't just negligence, it was illegal. Then came the late-night call from Ray. "You ever wonder where all those fine payments go?" he asked. "Check the contractors." We met at his garage the next day. He had an old laptop running slower than molasses, but it worked. Together, we pulled the vendor lists from HOA newsletters, landscaping maintenance dock repairs, each billed through companies I'd never heard of. A quick check on the Florida Division of Corporations website showed something interesting. 3 of those companies shared the same mailing address as Veronica's husband's real estate LLC. Conflict of interest 101. I leaned back in Ray's creaky chair, feeling the edges of a smile tug at my mouth for the first time in weeks. "They're paying themselves with community money," I said. "Now you're catching on," Ray replied. "But don't rush. Let them think you're just another angry homeowner. They'll get sloppy." So I waited. Every morning I logged new violations. Every evening I wrote letters and took photos. I recorded every conversation. Florida's a one-party consent state after all. When Veronica showed up unannounced one afternoon to inspect my property, I caught her on tape saying, "You make this personal, Ethan, you'll regret it." She had no idea how personal it already was. By April, my binder was an inch thick. I'd mapped every citation across a printed plat of the neighborhood. The pattern was perfect, every fine issued within 300 feet of Veronica's house or her allies. Selective enforcement clear as day. I wasn't looking for revenge, I was looking for order. The same thing engineers crave when staring at a blueprint. But every plan needs tension, and in Pelican Harbor, tension was everywhere. Neighbors whispered but stayed silent. Some feared losing access to community amenities. Others just didn't want trouble. I couldn't blame them. Standing up to an HOA felt like standing against gravity. It always wins. Except this time I had numbers, law, and patience on my side. The night I finished labeling my evidence folders, I poured a small glass of whiskey, raised it to Mia's old photo on the shelf, and said, "They built their dock on the wrong foundation, sweetheart. And I'm going to make sure the tide reminds them." Outside lightning flickered over the bay. Somewhere across the canal, a towboat's engine coughed to life again. The sound rolled through the dark like a promise. 2 mornings later, another letter arrived, this time hand-delivered and taped to my front door. The envelope bore the HOA's embossed logo gold foil, shimmering in the Florida sun like a warning flare. Inside, notice of hearing. Property compliance review. Scheduled for Thursday at 1:00 a.m. Failure to appear may result in suspension of dock access privileges. That sentence alone told me everything. They weren't interested in dialogue. They wanted submission. I took the letter next door to Ray. He read it twice, then laughed so hard he spilled coffee on his shorts. "They're calling you in for a hearing without giving you 10 days' notice. That's procedural suicide." I stared at the paper. "They really think I'll just show up, apologize, and pay." Ray's grin faded. "They don't think, Ethan. They count on people folding. That's their business model." So I prepared. The night before the hearing, I filled a binder with printed statutes, Florida 720, 303720, 305 and 617.0832, the Holy Trinity of HOA governance. Each page flagged with sticky notes. I wanted to be ready for anything, but I still couldn't predict how surreal it would feel sitting in that prefab meeting trailer the next morning, surrounded by 5 board members pretending to be a court. The air conditioning rattled. The blinds were half closed, casting striped shadows across a conference table too large for the room. Veronica Hale sat at the head, a pearl necklace perfectly centered on her pink blouse. To her right, the HOA's compliance officer flipped through a manila folder labeled Ward Violations. I recognized my own photographs taken from angles only someone standing on my property could have shot. "Mr. Ward," Veronica began, her voice smooth as varnish. "We're here to address repeated violations of community standards, specifically unauthorized dock use and improper storage. Would you like to make a statement?" I smiled. "Sure. Can I record this meeting for my records?" Her jaw tightened. "That's unnecessary. It's legal," I said, setting my phone on the table and pressing record. One-party consent state. Ray was sitting quietly behind me, pretending to sip from his thermos. He winked. Veronica leaned forward. "Mr. The board voted unanimously to amend the dock use policy in February. You were notified. I slid a copy of the county's records across the table. You mean this amendment, I said. Filed without a notary, missing witness signatures, and therefore unenforceable under statute 720.3031. Want me to read the section out loud? Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The compliance officer cleared his throat. Regardless, the board has authority to interpret covenants in good faith. Interpret, I repeated. Not invent. The room fell silent, except for the whir of the AC. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, not from fear but from focus, the same feeling I got on job sites when a structure began to settle under stress. You could sense which beam would buckle first. After the meeting adjourned, Ray and I walked out into the blinding sunlight. You just put a crack in the hull, he said. Now you wait for the water to find its way in. He was right. Over the next 2 weeks, I noticed subtle shifts. Neighbors who once avoided me now waved from their lawns. Someone left a sealed envelope in my mailbox. No name, just a single printed page. Pelican Harbor HOA Vendor Summary Q1 Q3. It listed payments to 3 companies: Hale Marine Services, LLC, Sunpath Consulting, and Shoreline Repair Group. Each address different, yet all registered to the same P.O. box downtown. I cross-referenced those addresses with the state database. My hands trembled slightly. As the results appeared, every one of them traced back to Veronica's husband, Gregory Hale. Conflict of interest didn't even begin to cover it. This was self-dealing, potentially criminal. I scanned everything, backed it up on an external drive, and printed duplicates for safekeeping. Then I sent a certified letter to the HOA office requesting full financial disclosure within 10 business days, citing the exact statute line that required compliance. The green return receipt arrived 2 days later, signed by Veronica herself. She just trapped herself in a timeline she couldn't escape. Day 10 came and went. No response. On day 11, I found a note shoved through the mail slot. Cease harassment of board members or further action will be taken. No signature, no letterhead. Ray laughed when he saw it. They're panicking. Classic move before the collapse. Still, the stress was real. Every evening I'd hear footsteps on the sidewalk, slow and deliberate pausing near my driveway. My motion lights clicked on, but no one was ever there when I checked the feed. Once I woke at 2 a.m. to find my trash cans overturned, and rules apply to all spray painted on the lid. I started double-locking the gate. Fear had an odor, metallic, familiar. Then came the retaliation in daylight. On a Wednesday afternoon, I returned from a site inspection to find a sheriff's cruiser idling outside my house. The deputy approached with a polite but puzzled look. "Mr. Ward got a wellness check request. Someone reported possible self-harm concerns." I blinked. "You're kidding." He shook his head. "Anonymous call." "You okay?" I laughed, maybe too loudly. "Perfectly fine, officer. Just dealing with an HOA that thinks due process is optional." He smirked. "You'd be surprised how often I hear that." After he left, I sat on the porch, letting the anger settle into something colder. They'd weaponized the system called law enforcement as a scare tactic. Fine. I'd weaponize documentation. That night I installed 4 new cameras, one over the dock, one at the front gate, one facing the street, and one covering the mailbox. All visible, all within legal limits. Their blinking red LEDs became my quiet protest signs. Around that time, I met Sarah Lynn, a real estate attorney recommended by one of Ray's Coast Guard buddies. Her office was a converted beach bungalow filled with case files and potted ferns. She listened to my story without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes. When I finished, she leaned back, eyes sharp. "Selective enforcement and self-dealing," she said. "That's a 1 to 2 punch. You have enough for state-level inquiry if you're patient." I nodded. "Patience I have. What I need is precision." She smiled. "Then we'll get surgical." Sarah explained that any HOA officer benefiting financially from association contracts must disclose it in writing or face removal and possible misdemeanor charges. "You can't just accuse," she said. "You have to prove pattern and intent. We'll start with paper trails, insurance policies, vendor invoices, and annual budgets. Those are public if requested correctly." She slid a blue folder across her desk. "Use these templates. Send one each day. Certified mail. Make them dig their own grave with receipts." That night, I began my campaign of paperwork. 1 request per day, budget audits, vendor rosters, meeting minutes, each stamped, signed, logged. If they ignored me, that too became evidence. By the end of the month, I had 12 unanswered requests, each with proof of delivery. a pattern of non-compliance, clean and irrefutable. Then, one humid afternoon, a plain envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. Inside, a photocopy of the HOA's insurance certificate. At the bottom, under additional named insured, was printed Hale Marine Services LLC, the same company Veronica owned through her husband. Ray whistled when I showed him. That's your smoking gun, son. She insured her own business under the HOA's policy. That's fraud. I didn't say anything. I just stared at the document, tracing the typed date with my finger, renewed January 12th. That meant every dock fine, every maintenance charge, every cent of community insurance money had been tied to a private company masquerading as public service. The tide had shifted. I wasn't the one under investigation anymore. Still, Sarah's voice echoed in my head. Be patient. Be boring. Be precise. So I sat at my desk, organizing the evidence into 4 binders, labeled in clean engineer's handwriting: A. Legal defects. B. Financial conflicts. C. Enforcement pattern. D. Insurance fraud. I didn't know it then, but those binders would eventually sit under fluorescent lights while an entire community watched the woman who tried to ruin me lose everything. For now, I only closed the final binder, leaned back and whispered, "Your move, Veronica." Outside, thunder rolled in from the Gulf, steady and low like applause, waiting for the curtain to rise. The storm rolled in hard that night, fat raindrops hammering the canal, lightning tearing open the horizon every few seconds. I watched from my porch as the dock lights flickered against the churning water, the kind of cinematic chaos that makes you feel small but alive. Inside, my phone buzzed nonstop emails from the HOA board, each colder and more bureaucratic than the last. The subject lines read like threats, immediate compliance required, final warning, board review pending. I didn't open them. Their paper empire was already starting to lean, and I wanted to let gravity do its work. The next morning, I met Sarah Lynn again, this time at the county courthouse. She'd pulled the official filings for Hale Marine Services LLC, the company Veronica used to siphon HOA funds. Registered agent Gregory Hale, she said, pointing to the document. But look here, 2 other subsidiaries filed the same week: Sunpath Consulting and Pelican Maintenance Group. Same P.O. box, same tax ID trail. She tapped her pen. They didn't even try to hide it. That's greed mixed with arrogance, I asked. So what's our next move? 2 fronts, she said. 1 legal, 1 tactical. We'll report the conflict to the Division of Condominiums. That'll trigger a slow burn investigation. But if you want immediate leverage, you need something stronger, something that touches the property itself. I frowned. You mean physical leverage? She smiled faintly. Exactly. That word echoed in my head, the whole drive home leverage. Engineers understand leverage better than anyone. It's not about strength. It's about where you place your fulcrum. That night over dinner with Ray, I told him what Sarah had said. He set down his fork. Funny thing, he said. You know those narrow strips of land under the dock access road, the ones that connect the main street to the pier? Yeah, I said. The HOA calls them easements. Not exactly, Ray replied, grinning. They're actually tax parcels. County auctioned one off last year for unpaid stormwater assessments. I bought one just for kicks. Cost me less than a dinner bill. You could check if the HOA's still delinquent on the other parcels. My mind clicked into overdrive. If they are, that land could be bought legally by anyone. Ray leaned back. And if that land supports the dock, well, let's just say their legal footing might not be as solid as they think. The next morning, I logged into the county property tax database and searched Pelican Harbor Dock Access Road. There it was. Parcel IDs 1424B and 1424C. Both showed 2 years of unpaid assessments, each about $700. The lien sale was scheduled for the following month. I called Sarah immediately. You're not going to believe this, I said. I found our fulcrum. Within a week, she helped me set up a neutral entity, Gulf Meridian Trust LLC, registered to her office address, not mine. It sounded bland enough to be invisible. We transferred just under $1,500 to the county treasurer, marked as pre-authorized funds for the upcoming lien auction. Everything about it was clean, legal, boring, exactly how I wanted it. While we waited, I kept feeding the fire quietly. I posted none of it online. No rants, no confrontation videos, nothing. Let Veronica believe I'd given up. I kept mowing my lawn, trimming the hedges, waving politely whenever her Escalade rolled past. But every smile was another nail in the coffin she didn't know existed. Meanwhile, the board grew bolder. They started sending violation notices to other residents, trash cans, visible garden gnomes, exceeding height limits, non-conforming light temperatures. The neighborhood began to fracture. People whispered about resignations, secret meetings, favoritism. The atmosphere was ripe for collapse. All it needed was the right push. Then came the towboat again. I heard its diesel rumble before I saw it. The same yellow crane arm swung over the canal, lowering a pontoon onto the slip registered to Veronica's nephew. I took photos time-stamped, geotagged, and stored them in Binder C, selective enforcement plain as sunrise. That evening, Ray came by with 2 mugs of coffee and a look that meant he had news. "You're not going to believe who I ran into at the marina," he said, one of the towboat guys. He told me the HOA pays him cash under the table, no invoices, just envelopes. I nearly dropped my mug. Cash payments, that's untraceable. Unless you have photos of the towboat operating under an HOA order, Ray said. Which, lucky for us, you do. It was all coming together like the beams of a bridge. Each piece supported the next. But still, I wanted the hammer blow to be undeniable. So I went to the county's lien auction in early June, sitting beside Sarah in her office as she pulled up the live feed. The auction site was bare bones, just parcel numbers and bid boxes. "We'll keep it low," she said. "No one's watching these." At precisely 10:00 a.m., the digital gavel icon appeared. Parcel 1424B opening bid $712.23. Sarah clicked. Gulf Meridian Trust bid placed. The line blinked green. "You are the high bidder." We waited 30 seconds. No counterbids. Then the confirmation, "Sold." Next parcel 1424. C. Same result. I stared at the screen half in disbelief. "That's it, we own them." "Not quite," Sarah said. "You own the tax certificates, which means the HOA can't sell, lease, or alter anything that crosses those parcels without your consent. The dock, the walkway, the towpath all depend on that access. You just became their landlord." I leaned back in my chair, feeling something between triumph and awe. "So the ground under their dock belongs to me now," technically, she said to Gulf Meridian Trust. "But yes." That night I printed the certificates on thick paper, sealed them in an envelope marked confidential, and tucked it behind my engineering manuals. I didn't tell Ray right away. I wanted to sit with the weight of it, how quiet power really works. From that point on, every new HOA notice felt like theater. They could find me, threaten me, gossip, all they wanted. Beneath their polished dock and their artificial authority, the legal foundation literally rested on property I controlled. Still, I didn't act yet. Patience was a tool sharper than any lawyer's pen. I needed one more trigger, something public enough to turn my quiet leverage into a spotlight. It came a week later, when Veronica announced a mandatory special assessment meeting for July 15th. Agenda: dock maintenance and legal defense funding. Each household was to pay $1,500 to replenish the association's reserves. Ray dropped the notice on my table with a grim smile. They're about to tax everyone to pay for their own cover-up. I glanced at the date, then at the manila envelope on my bookshelf. Perfect timing, I said. By then, my evidence had grown into 4 binders thick as textbooks. Every letter, every photo, every timestamp cross-indexed. Even the anonymous insurance leak sat inside, sealed in a plastic sleeve. But my favorite exhibit, the one that would end this war, was smaller than all the rest. 2 stamped tax certificates worth less than $1,500. It's strange how quiet justice can be. It doesn't roar. It waits. That night, lightning flashed again across the Gulf. I stood on the dock, the same place my BMW had once hung, dripping from a crane, and thought, you can steal money, power, even dignity, but not gravity. Eventually, it all falls back to the ground, and now the ground was mine. By early July, Pelican Harbor looked perfect from a distance, sunlight glinting off manicured lawns, the canal water calm as glass, but underneath tension rippled like heat over asphalt. The HOA had posted glossy flyers at every mailbox. Mandatory community meeting, July 1-5-6-00 p.m. Discussion of special assessment for legal defense fund. They used words like unity and preservation, but everyone knew what it really meant. They wanted us to pay for their mess. Neighbors began whispering. Some, terrified of retaliation, planned to vote yes just to stay invisible. Others, like Ray and me, were done hiding. "They're trying to plug a sinking ship with our wallets," he muttered, flicking the flyer into the trash. "We'll be there, front row." I'd spent the previous week organizing the binders A through D into what Sarah called the silent bomb. She helped me prepare a formal statement with statute citations, photographic exhibits, and a copy of the county's property plat, highlighting those 2 slender parcels of land under the dock. Every page had purpose. Every number led somewhere, but before I detonated anything, we needed one final proof of Veronica's corruption evidence that she personally benefited from the dock improvement invoices her own company had billed to the HOA. That trail was buried in the association's accounting software, locked behind credentials I couldn't access, until one night opportunity arrived, wrapped in plastic. At 9:42 p.m., I got a text from Lydia Chen, a quiet accountant who lived 2 streets over. We'd spoken only once months earlier when she mentioned her irritation about HOA reinspection fees. Her message was short: "You didn't get this from me. Check your mailbox in 10 minutes. When I opened the box, a small flash drive sat inside a sandwich bag. No note. The next morning, I plugged it into my laptop offline just in case and opened a folder titled Budget 2023, Q2. Inside were dozens of PDFs, invoices, board minutes, and scanned checks. The checks were signed by Veronica Hale and made out to Hale Marine Services, LLC. Total $18,600. Description: dock railing upgrade, composite tie rails type 3 amperes. I nearly laughed. Type 3 amperes wasn't a real material code. It was fiction. I forwarded everything to Sarah, who called me an hour later. "This crosses the line from HOA abuse into criminal fraud," she said. "Don't confront her yet. Let her certify that assessment next week. Once she speaks on record, we'll have her under oath, even if it's just a community hall." So we waited. The days leading up to the meeting were oddly quiet. No new violations, no late-night footsteps, no fake wellness checks. I think Veronica believed the storm had passed. She underestimated how long engineers can wait in silence. July 15th came thick with humidity, the kind that sticks to your skin. The community hall sat beside the canal, a white stucco building that smelled faintly of bleach and burnt coffee. Rows of folding chairs filled quickly. Retirees fanned themselves with newsletters, younger couples whispered in irritation. The murmur carried a rhythm of suspicion. Ray nudged me. "See that guy by the wall?" he whispered. I turned to see a tall woman in a gray blazer county badge, clipped to her belt. Sergeant Elena Morales, the investigator Sarah, had quietly invited as an observer. At exactly 6 o'clock, Veronica tapped her gavel, a real one-polished cherry wood, like she thought she was presiding over Congress. "Let's bring this meeting to order," she announced, her voice syrup sweet, but cracking faintly under the microphone feedback. "We've faced unprecedented hostility and frivolous complaints that threaten our community's harmony. To protect Pelican Harbor, the board proposes a one-time assessment of $1,500 per household to fund legal expenses." She paused for applause. None came. Someone from the back muttered, "What legal expenses?" Another voice, "Who's suing who?" Veronica's smile tightened. "Pending matters cannot be disclosed due to confidentiality." That's when I stood. "With respect, Madam President, that's false." Every head turned. I walked to the front, binder A under my arm. Under Florida Statute 720.3034, all association expenditures exceeding 10% of the annual budget require open documentation upon request. I filed those requests, 12 of them. Not one received a reply. Her gavel struck the table. "Mr. Ward, you are not recognized to speak." Under the same statute, I continued, "Members have the right to address financial matters before any assessment vote. So you will hear me." The room erupted, murmurs, camera phones clicking, Ray nodding like a proud sergeant. Veronica's cheeks flushed crimson. I opened binder B, flipping to the color printouts of her own checks. "These are payments authorized and signed by you, made to a company you and your husband own. Ale Marine Services, LLC. The invoices reference non-existent materials. That's self-dealing and misappropriation of funds." Her voice cracked. "Those were approved maintenance costs." "Then why do the supplier codes not exist in any marine registry?" I asked, sliding a second page forward. "Why does your company appear as an additional insured on the HOA's liability policy?" The county investigator shifted her weight, eyes narrowing. I pulled out binder C next. "And if maintenance was truly impartial, how do you explain this? 27 time-stamped photos of boats and decor belonging to board members, each in violation of the same rules used to fine others." The audience began whispering louder now. Someone said, "That's my dock." Veronica slammed the gavel again. "This meeting is adjourned," but the investigator stepped forward. "Not yet. Florida's Open Meeting Act requires a majority vote to adjourn." She turned to the room. All in favor of continuing, hands shot up more than half. The silence that followed was the kind you could measure in heartbeats. I set the final binder D on the table and opened it slowly. Inside were the 2 county tax certificates, neatly laminated. And lastly, I said these documents show that Gulf Meridian Trust LLC, a fully registered entity, holds the tax liens on the 2 parcels of land directly beneath the dock access road. Veronica blinked. That's impossible. Not impossible, I said softly, just unpaid. I placed copies on the projector table, the county seal shining under fluorescent light. As of June 3rd, those parcels are under lien, meaning the HOA cannot legally operate, maintain, or collect fees for any structure crossing that land without consent from the certificate holder. A collective gasp rolled through the hall. You're bluffing, she whispered. Sarah, seated at the side, raised a hand. Filed and certified, Madam President. You can verify with the clerk's office. That land is now encumbered. Your dock, your tow operations, your entire enforcement infrastructure, it all runs through property you no longer control. The investigator scribbled notes. That would constitute a severe governance breach, she said evenly. I'll need copies of all these exhibits. Veronica's hand trembled as she dropped the gavel. This is extortion. No, I said calmly. This is ownership. The same concept you've weaponized against everyone else. The room exploded, neighbors cheering, a few crying phones recording from every angle. Ray's laughter rumbled from the back. Told you she'd fold, he said under his breath. As the noise swelled, I looked at the ceiling, letting the fluorescent lights blur into white streaks. For the first time in months, I exhaled without anger. Outside, the humid air hit like steam. Ray clapped my shoulder. You didn't just win, Ethan. You flipped the whole damn script. Maybe he was right, but victory didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like structure, something finely built to code. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the inspection before the rebuild. For 2 days after the meeting, Pelican Harbor was electric. The clip of Veronica's gavel slipping from her hand had gone viral on neighborhood Facebook groups and even leaked onto local news. The headline read, "Homeowner legally outsmarts HOA over dock control." I didn't post it, but I didn't need to. Someone else had uploaded the entire confrontation. Within 24 hours, it had 20,000 views and counting. Neighbors who used to look away now waved from across lawns. Some knocked on my door with stories of their own citations for grass too, long holiday lights, lingering trash cans visible at noon. It was like floodgates had opened, each person realizing they'd never been alone in this. But for every hand extended, another threat slithered closer. Anonymous notes reappeared in my mailbox. You're dividing the community. You'll regret this. The dock isn't yours forever. One morning I found my fence latch broken, the screws pried out neatly, not vandalism, but a message. I took photos, logged the time, and sent everything to Sarah. They're rattled, she said over the phone. That's good. Fear makes people careless. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. My small victory had turned into a spotlight, and I'd never wanted fame, just fairness. But the moment you stand up to a bully, you can't choose how loud the echo gets. 3 days later, the HOA issued a special board bulletin. Veronica's name wasn't on it this time, just Pelican Harbor Board of Directors. The language was sterile. Pending review by county officials, all dock operations are temporarily suspended. Homeowners are advised not to interact with media representatives. I almost laughed. They were trying to control the narrative, but the narrative had already escaped. That afternoon, Ray walked in unannounced, 2 coffees in hand. You see this, he asked, tossing the flyer onto my table. They're closing the dock like it's Chernobyl. Good, I said. Keeps them from illegally collecting fees. Ray grinned. And gives us time to build your next move. My next move, Sarah called it Phase 2, was to formalize everything. We'd file a complaint to the state, attach the meeting transcript, and submit copies of the tax certificates and financial conflicts. That would trigger a statutory audit under Florida's Department of Business and Professional Regulation. Once the state stepped in, the HOA couldn't simply sweep things under the rug. But bureaucracy moves slower than tides. While we waited, I turned my attention to something more dangerous: public perception. Pelican Harbor wasn't a movie, but it was starting to feel like one-side characters picking teams, whispers over fences, the villain barricading herself behind polite emails. Veronica had vanished from view, claiming medical leave. Her husband Gregory quietly transferred ownership of Hale Marine Services, LLC, to a dummy corporation registered out of Georgia. I tracked the paperwork online through the Division of Corporations, screenshot after screenshot. It was all so predictable, it almost felt rehearsed. Then one steamy afternoon, Ray showed up with a folder so thick it bulged like an overstuffed wallet. Got this from an old friend in the Coast Guard, he said. Records of vessel registrations in this canal. Take a look. I flipped through. Page after page listed boats moored in violation of HOA rules, unregistered pontoons, extended dock stays, even a rental yacht sitting there for months. Half the names matched board members or their relatives. Selective enforcement wasn't just speculation anymore. It was data. "Ray," I said slowly, "this is dynamite." He chuckled. "Nah, this is sonar. Shows you what's under the surface." We spent that night mapping every violation on a printed aerial photo of the harbor. I drew red circles for board-related boats, blue for homeowners. The pattern was perfect clear bias wrapped in paperwork. When Sarah saw it the next morning, she actually smiled. "This," she said, "is what investigators call a self-inflicted wound." By the end of the week, she'd filed the full complaint packet, 214 pages, indexed, tabbed, certified. She overnighted it to Tallahassee. "Give them 2 weeks," she said. "Then the calls start." Those 2 weeks stretched like an elastic band. I tried to live normally, went back to bridge inspections for work, mowed the lawn, even joined Ray for a barbecue, but I could feel eyes on me every time I walked outside. Once I spotted a black SUV idling near the mailbox cluster engine, running, no driver visible. When I approached, it pulled away slowly like a shadow with wheels. Ray shrugged it off. "Could be a realtor. Could be a ghost. Either way, keep filming." So I did. Every odd car, every motion light trigger, every whisper on the HOA Facebook group captured, time-stamped, archived. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. Then, like thunder after humidity, the letter finally came. State of Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation notice of formal inquiry. It stated that Pelican Harbor HOA was under investigation for potential financial impropriety and governance violations. Effective immediately, all enforcement actions were suspended pending review. I read it twice, then a third time. My hands trembled, not from fear this time, but release. For months, they dictated every rule. Now the law had taken the microphone. Ray raised his coffee in a mock toast. To the calm before the audit. The next day, I walked down to the dock for the first time since that meeting. The air smelled of salt and redemption. The sun glared off the water bright enough to hide the stains on the pier's planks. I stood where my BMW had once been lifted, remembering how small I'd felt that day. Funny thing, same dock, same tide, but it no longer felt like theirs. I heard footsteps. Turning, I saw Lydia walking toward me, a stack of papers in hand. "I've been compiling," she said, breathless. "Budget anomalies, unvoted assessments, even duplicate invoices. It's worse than we thought." We sat on a bench overlooking the canal while she flipped through the pages. Each entry told a story. Maintenance fees billed twice, landscaping payments for non-existent flower beds, an entire dock lighting upgrade charged in cash. Total discrepancies over $47,000. "That's theft," I said quietly. She nodded. "And you gave them the stage to expose it. Everyone's talking. They want reform, not revenge." That word reform lodged itself in my chest. I'd started this war to defend a single dock, but somehow it had grown into something larger, something structural. This wasn't just about me versus Veronica anymore. It was about whether communities like ours could police themselves or whether power always rotted from the inside. That night, as rain whispered on the roof, I opened my laptop and began drafting something new. Not a complaint, not evidence, a blueprint. Title: The Pelican Harbor Transparency Charter. The preamble read, "We, the homeowners of Pelican Harbor, pledge that no single office shall outweigh the collective voice of the community, that all budgets shall be open, all terms limited, all enforcement equal, and that no one shall profit from what belongs to all." It wasn't vengeance. It was reconstruction. When I sent the draft to Sarah, she replied instantly, "You realize this could become precedent, right?" "Good," I typed back. "Maybe the next guy won't have to buy the ground under his own dock just to be treated fairly." As midnight crept closer, I saved the document, closed my laptop, and looked out toward the canal. The water was calm again, the reflection of the streetlights stretching like silver veins. For the first time since Mia died, the quiet didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. The investigation was still ongoing. Veronica was still out there somewhere, licking her wounds or planning her next move. But I had no fear left to give. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't loud, it's lawful. And tomorrow we'd start building something better on the same ground they tried to bury me under. The audit storm hit faster than any of us expected. By mid-August, state investigators had arrived at Pelican Harbor, 2 sedans with county plates, clipboards in hand, escorted by Sergeant Elena Morales. Their presence sent waves through the community. The same neighbors who once whispered behind curtains now stood on porches, arms folded, watching authority finally shift directions. The HOA office, a double-wide trailer painted beige, suddenly looked like a sinking ship surrounded by lifeboats. Veronica was nowhere to be found. Officially, she was on medical leave. Unofficially, she was hiding. Her husband Gregory had shuttered Hale Marine Services, dissolving it on paper, and transferring the remains to a ghost LLC in Savannah. But Sarah was faster. She'd already filed a preservation motion freezing all financial records and forbidding the destruction of HOA data. If they tried to delete a file, it would count as obstruction. The first inspection day felt like vindication disguised as bureaucracy. I stood outside the HOA trailer with Ray binder in hand as the investigators set up folding tables and scanners. Elena glanced at me over her sunglasses. "You've been busy," she said. "Engineers don't like broken systems," I replied. She smiled faintly. "Well, this one's getting rebuilt." By noon, the investigators had already uncovered multiple discrepancies, duplicate vendor payments, missing receipts, unsigned authorizations. One of them shook his head. "It's like a bad sitcom in here," he muttered. Meanwhile, the community hall buzzed with rumors. Someone claimed Veronica had fled to her sister's condo in Miami. Another said she'd hired an attorney to sue the HOA for emotional distress. But the real story came from Lydia. She'd been analyzing the HOA's bank ledgers line by line, tracing transactions marked consulting. Her discovery stunned even Sarah. Nearly $60,000 diverted into professional fees over 2 years, all flowing into accounts linked to Gregory Hale. "This isn't just mismanagement," Sarah said. "It's organized, self-dealing." I asked, "Will the state press charges?" "They will if we keep the pressure public," she said. "Sunlight only works when it's bright." That was the challenge, keeping people engaged without turning the fight into spectacle. So Ray and I hosted an open-air town meeting on the marina lawn. No microphones, no gavel, no intimidation, just chairs, notebooks, and an honesty that had been missing for years. About 40 neighbors showed up. Lydia brought spreadsheets, Tom from the next block brought copies of invoices, and I brought coffee for everyone. "We're not here to destroy the HOA," I said, standing in front of the group. "We're here to reclaim it." A woman in her 60s raised her hand. "But can we?" After all this, after what they did, I looked around at the tired, frustrated faces, the landscaper fined for a cracked paver, the teacher forced to repaint her porch 3 times, the retired veteran who'd lost access to the dock he'd helped build. "We can," I said. "Because they built this system wrong. We'll rebuild it right." That was the night the Pelican Harbor Reform Committee was born. Lydia handled finances. Ray organized communications. Tom volunteered for maintenance audits. And me, I became the accidental architect of our own redemption. Over the following weeks, we drafted what we called the Transparency Charter term limits of 2 years for all board members. Public posting of budgets and votes within 10 days. Mandatory third-party audits every fiscal year. Prohibition of any contracts involving relatives or affiliates. An online portal for residents to review all expenditures. Sarah helped refine the legal language so it couldn't be twisted later. Every clause had teeth-specific citations, measurable deadlines, consequences for non-compliance. We weren't just fixing a dock. We were designing a constitution. But power rarely surrenders quietly. The night before our next meeting, I noticed headlights idling across the street. A black SUV again, same as before. I stepped outside with my phone recording. The vehicle rolled forward, pausing long enough for me to see a hand holding a camera. Then it sped away. 10 minutes later, a new HOA email landed in my inbox. "Cease unauthorized filming of board property or further legal action will follow." Ray chuckled when he saw it. That's their idea of a scarecrow. Still, the threat rattled me. Not because I feared them, but because they were desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. 2 days later, the state sent official notice, Pelican Harbor HOA, Audit Findings Preliminary Summary. It listed 5 major violations, including conflict of interest, selective enforcement, and misappropriation of funds. The recommendation, temporary suspension of all HOA operations pending restructuring. We'd done it. At least that's what I thought. The following week, Veronica resurfaced, flanked by a lawyer wearing a Navy suit and a smirk. They appeared at a closed-door emergency session, trying to pass a motion invalidating all previous complaints as defamatory. But someone inside recorded the whole thing. Within hours, the footage hit social media, Veronica screaming at Elena, calling her a county bureaucrat, her attorney whispering, "This isn't helping." The clip spread faster than wildfire. Local reporters began calling. One headline read, "HOA president melts down during fraud probe." By then, it was over. 2 board members resigned the next morning. The management company issued a statement distancing itself from the Hales. And finally, on August 30th, the HOA received the formal directive. Board dissolved. Temporary receivership appointed. When I read the notice, I didn't cheer. I just sat at my kitchen table staring at the paper. The war was over, but the silence that followed felt strange, too big, too empty. For months I'd lived on adrenaline and legal documents. Now there was just stillness. Ray dropped by later that night holding a six-pack and wearing that lopsided grin. Feels weird, doesn't it, winning? Feels unfinished, I admitted. He cracked a beer and handed me one. That's because victory isn't the same as repair. You tore down the rotten beams. Now you gotta rebuild. And he was right, so we moved forward. The state appointed an interim board. 3 residents voted in by open ballot supervised by Sergeant Morales. I declined nomination. I didn't want power. I just wanted equilibrium. Lydia became treasurer. Tom took maintenance oversight, and Ray reluctantly agreed to serve as liaison. On September 10th, the first official act of the new board was to adopt the Transparency Charter. It passed unanimously. Cameras flashed, people clapped softly, and someone even brought cupcakes. It wasn't dramatic, it was dignified. After the meeting, Elena approached me. You know, she said most people just complain about HOAs. You actually rewired one. I smiled. Engineers fix what's broken. She extended her hand. On behalf of the county, thank you for reminding everyone that paperwork can be powerful. When she left, I walked down to the dock alone. The sun was setting, throwing molten orange across the canal. The water reflected perfectly smooth, steady, lawful again. I stood there until the light faded, thinking of Mia. I imagined her laughing softly, saying what she always did when a project finally stood upright, told you it would hold. That night, I renamed the dock Mia's Landing. I carved the name into a cedar plank and bolted it to the railing, not for victory, but for peace. Because in the end, all I'd ever wanted was to keep her promise alive, a small piece of Florida that belonged to no one but those who respected it. September drifted into October, and with it came the quiet aftermath, the long exhale after the explosion. Pelican Harbor was different now. The lawns still looked perfect, the palms still swayed over the canal, but the tension that once clung to the air had lifted. Neighbors talked again. Laughter returned to the marina. And at night, the dock lights, those same ones that had once illuminated corruption, glowed steady and warm like lanterns marking a safe harbor. The state's final audit report arrived on a Monday morning. Sarah called me the moment it hit her inbox. You'd better sit down for this, she said. They confirmed everything: embezzlement, falsified invoices, self-dealing, and fraudulent enforcement. The county's recommending restitution and permanent removal of Veronica and Gregory Hale from all HOA activity statewide. I didn't answer at first. The weight of her words took a moment to land. It wasn't triumph. I felt it was release, the kind that seeps into your bones after carrying too much for too long. Restitution, I repeated. How much? $8,500 to you for property damage and fees, plus $47,000 reimbursed to the community fund, Sarah said. Gregory's already signed a plea agreement. Probation and 500 feet of no contact. Veronica's lawyer tried to argue administrative confusion, but the evidence was airtight. I let out a long breath. So that's it then, Sarah chuckled. That's never it, Ethan. But it's a damn good start. When I hung up, I looked around my living room, the same space where I'd once spread out binders, sleepless and angry, drowning in paperwork. The walls felt lighter. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was earned. That evening, Ray came over carrying a brown envelope. Guess what the county just delivered, he said, tossing it onto the table. Inside was a brass plaque with the county seal engraved across the top: community reform recognition, Pelican Harbor, for exemplary transparency and resident-led governance reform. I laughed quietly. You think they'll give me one for most patient homeowner under fire? Ray grinned. You'd win by a mile. We stood there for a minute, both of us staring at the plaque like it was a relic from another life. You realize, he said, this neighborhood's never going to be the same. People will actually think before they sign papers now. Good, I said. That's the point. But the ripples didn't stop at Pelican Harbor. News outlets started calling. Local radio ran a short segment: Engineer exposes HOA fraud sparks statewide reform. My phone filled with messages from homeowners across Florida, some desperate, some inspired. One email read, "My HOA just fined me for having a ramp for my wheelchair." "Can you tell me what laws protect me?" another said. "They've been taking our dues for years, and no one knows where the money goes." "How did you start your investigation?" It hit me then, this wasn't just my story anymore. It was a manual for survival. Sarah called a week later with an idea. "What if we publish your process?" she said. A guide for homeowners. Plain language, step by step. Like a blueprint, I said. Exactly, you're good at those. We gotta work. Lydia handled financial terminology, Ray reviewed procedural sections, and Sarah translated the legal jargon into something ordinary people could understand. We titled it Blueprint for Accountability, A Homeowner's Guide to HOA Reform. Each chapter began with a line from the battle I'd lived. Always assume the rulebook hides a weapon. If it isn't notarized, it isn't law. Never fight with anger, fight with evidence. By November, we had a polished 50-page PDF ready to release online for free. Sarah hosted it on her firm's website. Within 48 hours, it had been downloaded nearly 3,000 times. One comment stuck with me. I thought I was powerless until I read this. That night, as I sat on the porch, watching the reflection of the dock lights dance across the canal, I realized how far things had come. From fines and humiliation to reform and education, it felt less like revenge and more like evolution. Still, not everyone celebrated. A few holdouts whispered that I'd ruined Pelican Harbor's reputation. One even sent a letter signed anonymous. You'll drive down our property values. I pinned it to my corkboard with all the other relics of the past and smiled. Property values go up when truth does, I muttered. Then something unexpected happened. A week before Thanksgiving, the interim HOA board, Lydia, Ray, and Tom, invited me to speak at the first official community assembly under the new charter. We want you to open the meeting, Lydia said over the phone. You're the reason we even have one. I hesitated. I don't want this to be about me. It isn't, she replied. It's about what you built. That Friday evening, as the sun sank into the Gulf, neighbors gathered on the marina lawn. Folding chairs formed neat rows, fairy lights strung between palm trunks. The air smelled of salt and grilled burgers, not fear or tension. Kids played tag near the seawall while adults chatted softly. When Lydia tapped the microphone, the crowd quieted. Before we begin tonight's vote on community reforms, she said we want to thank someone who reminded us that courage doesn't need permission. She gestured to me. I stood, heart pounding harder than it had during any confrontation. I wasn't a speechmaker, but the words came anyway. I didn't plan to be here, I began. When this started, I just wanted to be left alone to fish off my dock to keep a promise to my late wife. But when people in power forget that rules are meant to serve, not punish, someone has to draw the line. Not with anger, with proof. I looked around the crowd, the same faces that had once avoided eye contact, now meeting mine with pride. We didn't tear this place down, I said. We repaired it. Together. Applause rippled through the marina, soft but steady like waves hitting the pier. Ray raised his beer can. To fixing what's broken, he shouted. To fixing what's broken, everyone echoed. Later, after the meeting ended and the sky had gone black except for the stars, I stayed behind at Mia's landing. The plaque gleamed in the moonlight beside the carved sign bearing her name. I touched the wood gently. We did it, Mia, I whispered. Your harbor's safe. Somewhere behind me, Ray's voice floated through the dark. Hey, engineer, what's next? I smiled without turning. Maybe another blueprint, he laughed. For what world peace? Something like that, I said. One HOA at a time. The night breeze carried the scent of salt and citrus. The water lapped softly against the dock pilings, steady, rhythmic, like the sound of something finally rebuilt. And for the first time in years, I knew exactly what peace was. Not silence, but structure. Not vengeance, but balance. Winter came slow to Florida that year, clear mornings, glassy canals, the kind of sunlight that made even the scars of Pelican Harbor shimmer like they were part of the plan. By January, the transparency charter had gone into full effect. The new board published every transaction online. Budgets were posted in real time. Meetings were live-streamed. It was all so normal, so transparent, so unrecognizable compared to what we'd lived through. I thought peace would feel quiet. Instead, it felt alive. Every morning, I'd sip coffee on the porch and watch neighbors walk by waving instead of glaring. The air of suspicion was gone. In its place was something rare for any HOA trust. It was fragile, yes, but real. Then the letters started coming again, this time not from lawyers or board members, but from homeowners all across the state. Some were typed, others handwritten, a few attached photos of their own neighborhoods. My HOA president fines me for planting fruit trees. How did you fight back? They're charging me $600 for parking my husband's medical van overnight. What statute protects me? Your story gave us courage. We formed our own reform committee. By February, Sarah had to create a separate email folder just to track inquiries from other communities. Ray joked, "You've gone from fighting one HOA to founding a rebellion." Maybe he wasn't wrong. That was when I decided to film again, not a confrontation this time, but a story. I set my phone on a tripod balanced on the same table where I once built my binder fortress. The soft hum of the canal filled the background. Reform isn't dramatic, I said into the lens. It's paperwork and patience. It's neighbors talking again instead of tattling. It's realizing that power only exists when people stop asking questions. The video went live that night. By morning, it had 10,000 views. By the end of the week, 50,000. The comment section flooded with homeowners trading stories like war veterans. Some angry, some hopeful, all connected by the same thread: exhaustion from being bullied by the systems meant to serve them. That's when Sarah called with a half-excited, half-exasperated tone. "Ethan, you've accidentally started a movement." She wasn't exaggerating. Within a month, Blueprint for Accountability had been downloaded over 30,000 times. Local journalists began calling it the Pelican Harbor model. Even a state senator's aide reached out to schedule a discussion about possible oversight legislation. I wasn't trying to be an activist. I was just an engineer who hated broken systems. But it turned out broken systems were everywhere. Ray came over one Saturday afternoon with a smirk and a printout. "You've got fans," he said, dropping the paper on the table. It was an article from a homeowner's blog, "Meet the Man Who Beat His HOA Legally." Underneath, a photo of me at the dock, mid-sentence from the video. "Guess fame was part of the deal," I muttered. Ray shrugged. "You didn't chase it. It found you." Still, not all attention was friendly. One morning, I found another anonymous note tucked under my wiper blade. "Stop teaching people to rebel." I took a picture, logged it in my notes, and tossed the paper into the recycling bin. It didn't even sting anymore. Bullies don't scare you once you've learned the rules they hide behind. Meanwhile, the new HOA board flourished. Lydia managed the finances like a surgeon cutting waste, rolling back unnecessary fees. Tom headed maintenance, coordinating volunteer days that saved the neighborhood thousands. Even Ray, the eternal skeptic, became the most efficient liaison the county had ever seen. And Mia's landing the dock that started it all became something bigger. The community voted to make it a public event space twice a year. We hosted the first open dock day in March. Kids fished from the pier while parents grilled burgers nearby. Someone brought a speaker and old Motown songs echoed over the water. At sunset, the whole dock turned gold under the fading light. A neighbor's daughter asked Mr. Ward, "Is it true you used to fight bad people here?" I smiled. "Not bad people," I said. "Just people who forgot how rules are supposed to work." She nodded, considering that like it was the most profound thing in the world, then ran off to join her friends. That night, as the last of the music faded, Lydia found me watching the water. "You know," she said, "the board's talking about renaming the canal after you." I shook my head. "No need. I didn't build this place. I just fixed a leak." She laughed softly. Still, leaks flood fast if no one bothers to patch them. Spring rolled in, bringing with it one final surprise. Sarah forwarded an email from the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. The subject line read, "Pilot Program Independent HOA Oversight Panel." The body of the message was short. "Based on the success of the Pelican Harbor model, the state is considering a voluntary transparency initiative. Your experience and documentation may serve as reference." I stared at the screen for a long time. The reform that had begun as a fight over a parking space was now being used to rewrite policy. Ray, of course, had the perfect reaction. "Well, engineer," he said, "you wanted to fix structures. Looks like you're rebuilding the whole damn state." We clinked beer bottles under the sunset. "To structure," I said. "To structure," he echoed. The night before the new oversight panel was announced, I filmed one last video for the channel. I sat by Mia's landing, the carved sign glowing under a soft lantern. "People ask if I regret fighting," I began. "Truth is, I never fought the HOA. I fought fear. Fear that the system's too complicated, that one voice can't matter, that you can't win without screaming. But you can. You win by documenting, by staying calm, by believing that fairness isn't fantasy." I looked into the camera. If you ever find yourself standing on your own dock, your own lawn, your own piece of peace, and someone tries to take it from you, remember this story. You don't need to shout. You just need to know the ground under your feet. The screen faded to black. I ended it with a single line: "Reform doesn't start with anger, it starts with evidence." When I hit upload, I didn't expect much, but within hours, the video's view count exploded. Comments poured in from across the country, homeowners, tenants, even lawyers thanking me for proving that justice still has blueprints. Weeks later, I got one final letter, official stationery, gold seal state signature. It was an award for outstanding civic integrity. At the bottom, a handwritten note from Sergeant Morales: "Paperwork wins wars." Thanks for proving it. I framed it not out of pride, but out of reminder that every system, no matter how corrupted, can be rebuilt if someone cares enough to measure, file, and fix. That evening, I took a walk to the dock. The air was cool, the canal mirror still. A pelican landed near the piling, rippling the reflection of Mia's landing. "You'd like this, Mia," I whispered. They finally learned what structure means. The lights shimmered softly, gold on water, and for the first time in years, the harbor truly lived up to its name. And that was how the war ended, not with handcuffs, not with shouting, but with signatures, reform, and the sound of calm waves against wood. Justice doesn't roar, it rebuilds.